This is not just another climate summit here in Astana. World leaders, heads of governments and international organizations, experts and policymakers are trying to answer one key question: how to address the region's environmental challenges when the rules of the game themselves seem unfair.
The Regional Ecological Summit 2026 brings together more than 1,500 participants, representatives of governments, international organizations, financial institutions, scientists, media and civil society. At its core, the summit aims to turn regional cooperation into practical solutions and position Central Asia as a unified voice in global climate discussions.
The summit opened with a plenary session where world leaders, and among them President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, delivered their remarks where they outlined their vision for environmental cooperation in the future.
For Tokayev, the climate crisis is already blurring borders. Across Central Asia, countries share the same rivers, landscapes and risks, making cooperation less a choice and more a necessity. He argued that climate action should bring countries together, not pull them apart.
It should be based on partnership, trust and shared responsibility, with no naming, no shaming and no blaming. As partners, we must work pragmatically and responsibly in support of peace and sustainable development. Dear participants, nature can exist without geopolitics, and the latter cannot exist without nature. Our countries share ecosystems. We share rivers, landscapes and climate risks. And most importantly, we share responsibility.
And in his remarks, President Tokayev didn't just call for action, he called for fairness. He warned that environmental cooperation is becoming politicized and that developing countries are often left carrying the burden.
From my perspective, selective approaches cannot be tolerated either on ecological matters. In many cases, environmental agendas are drafted and shaped without considering to the full extent the development needs of different regions and countries, especially of emerging states that are still building up their economic capacities. Meanwhile, developed nations reached their current environmental standards through long periods of the industrialization. Therefore, the global transition to cleaner models must be fair, balanced, and stimulating.
Central Asia is on the front line of climate change, facing water shortages, biodiversity loss and land degradation. And unlike global powers, the countries in the region are facing the consequences more than the causes.
The numbers tell the story. 2024 was the hottest year on record, with global temperatures reaching 1.55 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. But here, the impact is sharper. Central Asia is among the world's most climate-vulnerable regions, already facing rising temperatures, prolonged droughts and growing pressure on water resources. Glaciers, a critical source of fresh water, are melting at an accelerated pace. Extreme weather is becoming more frequent and more severe.
We saw this summit not as a one-time event, but rather as a process that will help to bring together the region in thinking about what are the challenges, but also what are the concrete solutions for our shared environmental challenges. It has been a very long time consultative process, both between the countries, but also with civil society, private sector, international partners and others.
That is why cooperation is no longer a long-term goal, it's an immediate necessity. That urgency is already translating into action. At the summit, Central Asian leaders moved to formalize their cooperation, signing a series of joint documents on environmental protection and sustainable development. They adopted a regional declaration reaffirming their commitment to coordinate on climate policy, water management, biodiversity and pollution. A signal that, at least on paper, the region is beginning to act as one. And Kazakhstan sees this momentum as something bigger than a single summit. Officials say the goal is to turn dialogue into a long-term process, one that brings governments, institutions and partners into a more coordinated response to shared environmental challenges.
And I think in this 3-day culminating event, we will see many interesting and new partnerships, but also most importantly we are expecting, of course, the declaration of the heads of state that will help us to identify the future and the further pathway in terms of what we would like to achieve as a region jointly moving forward, but also really have a joint program on cooperation and working with the United Nations in implementing our environmental shared vision.
At the center of that cooperation agenda is one of the region's most pressing challenges: water. Kazakhstan is now pushing to take that idea further, proposing the creation of a dedicated international water organization under the auspices of the United Nations.
Tomorrow we are going to have the first roundtable consultations, international consultations on this initiative, where we will be discussing some of the aspects, but also really we would like to hear the reflections from many countries. We already have a pretty long list of our partners who would like to share their opinions about this issue, and we look forward to having a very good and productive discussion.
But cooperation alone isn't enough. Climate action needs investment, and across the region that's still a major challenge. The bottlenecks aren't just financial, they are structural.
One is the lack of clear regulatory system that provide a clear direction of travel in terms of the investments, in terms of the creating the policy incentives and the signaling, market signals that ultimately facilitate the investment. So that's one quite typical barrier. But then there are specific issues. If you look, for example, at the industrial sector, the deep decarbonization of hard to abate sector, or let's say energy carbon intensive sector, ultimately is not necessarily a problem of finance or access to finance, but the main problems are lack of aggregated, sufficient, predictable demand when it comes to green products and green industrial commodities. But it's also the fact that most of these investments are highly capital intensive, which means they're often beyond the capability of the organizations in terms of balance sheet.
EBRD used the summit to launch a transition platform with Kazakhstan, aimed at helping countries decarbonize without leaving communities behind. Because the real question isn't just how fast economies go green, but who pays the price along the way.
This is an initiative of the Kazakh government that we've been asked to support. We're very proud and honored to be able to support the government in this initiative. It entails basically it's an accelerator of the green transition in the energy sectors. It entails, in fact, a strong emphasis on investments in renewable energy. There is also an element of just transition, so basically the type of activities that can support the communities affected. They are highly dependent on fossil fuel income in terms of their the regional economic outputs, support them with reskilling, with human capital development, but also providing the financial instruments to diversify through, for example, local credit lines, to diversify the economic activities in the specific region and in general in the countries.
And while policy debates continue, the human cost is already visible. International organizations are looking at the crisis from another angle, focusing on how environmental pressures are already affecting the most vulnerable.
Kids, and particularly the impact on children, should be prioritized and reflected into national policies such as national determined contributions, national adaptation plans, disaster risk reduction strategies. These efforts should be accompanied by system changes across multiple systems, including in healthcare, where primary healthcare in particular should prioritize understanding, prevention, but also advice to parents, to children and young people on the effects of heating and how to prevent it, how to protect themselves from heat.
So how do you actually protect children when the heat hits?
The education system should make schools more heat resilient by providing shade, by providing adaptation of the infrastructure, and by providing water, hydration, particularly during summer heat waves or summer days. Third, social protection systems should be adjusted to immediately support most vulnerable families when the heat wave comes.
we should understand that climate crisis is no longer just an environmental problem. It's political, it's economic, and it's deeply regional. And while summits like this promise solutions for millions of people who face water shortages and climate pressures already now, results cannot wait. And the harder part comes now, turning these solutions and promises into real action. This was Astana Times report for the Astana Times. Until next time.